Welcome back to Campus Pressbox. I'm your host, Damien Bowman. I'm joined by Campus Pressbox managing editor and SEC 411 co-host Seth Merenbloom. Seth, how are you?
I am great. How are you, Damien?
I'm well. Thanks for joining me. I feel like I've got the whole SEC 411 crew on this week. I had Bird earlier and then you today. So
yeah, you're just on a podcasting tear this week.
Yeah. Getting them in. A couple things that I want to talk to you about. First is the big salary controversy that was started by maybe by the University of Wisconsin's president and Barry Alvarez's follow-up comments, and then thoughts on what college coaches make in general compared to, obviously comparing them to what the rest of us make is silly, but maybe even, maybe CEOs of large companies or NFL coaches or basketball coaches or whatever. And then we'll talk about your superpower column that you wrote in relation to the University of Miami earlier this week. So first, how much does your favorite college coach make? Do you know?
Gary Pinkel. I think it's, I honestly don't know, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, probably 3.5 million, right? SEC.
Yeah, he might be closer to 4.5 or 5 now going into this year. Because I want to say he received a raise going into this year. And I mean, Pinkel is one of those coaches who he obviously has the healthy salary that, allows him to put some meager food and drink in his mouth. But he also has a lot of incentive pay built into his contract that I want to say may have come out to about $900,000 last year, maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I just pulled up the column here, and his base comp is 3.4, and then contract extension is 3.7 for this year, and then 4.1 for 2016, and then bonuses at about 900,000, which is crazy. I mean, here's the thing: it's not crazy, like crazy bad. It's just crazy that college coaches make this much money, and I'm not saying that I'm opposed to them making this much money. Like the president from the University of Wisconsin, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Well, here's what I like about Pinkel's contract in particular, and that is it is so heavily based on bonus pay and that incentive scale kicking in. So, I mean, there's a real incentive for him to get that team to produce week in and week out, season in and season out. And the other thing that I really like about his contract is that whenever he goes in to renegotiate his salary, he is doing the same for his assistant coaches as well.
Right, and I think that's kind of what started, I think, is maybe because it came out that some of Urban Meyer's assistants were making, we're making $500,000 more than they were making last year, and I think that's kind of how all this got started. Which, I mean, let's be real. I mean, if you want to keep these guys on staff, you don't want them to go somewhere else. Just because you win a national championship doesn't mean anything. Like, you have to give these guys money.
Sure, because once you win a national championship, even as an assistant coach, you are going to be a highly sought after coach.
Now, and this actually spins back to a podcast that I had with Maxwell Brusky from Buck Around a few weeks ago or a few months ago at this point, because I always talk about Wisconsin and Brett Bielema and Gary Anderson and Paul Chris and those guys. And one of the biggest things for Wisconsin has always been, or one of the things that they've been known for, is that they don't necessarily pay top dollar to any of their coaches. And Paul Chris this year is making $2.3 million, which, again, for you and I, $2.3 million would be great salary, like whatever. But it is certainly on the lower end of what Power 5 football coaches make.
Yeah, that sounds more like most Power 5 men's basketball coaches' salaries to me.
Yeah. And in relation to that, the chancellor, whose name, the Wisconsin chancellor, Rebecca Blank is her name, her salary is $499,000 a year. And Chris is making 2.3, which, again, right, like everybody always says that, the boss should make the most money in the thing. But I mean, at my company, like many of the people who report to me make more money than I do, because I mean, that's what you have to do to get people. So I don't really necessarily think that that's a big deal, but for whatever reason, people says it is a big deal. And I think it's whatever the market pays is whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's a difference in in the positions, the titles that a person holds, and to a large extent, the job itself kind of dictates what the person's salary is, because Ms. Blank's salary, I mean, she will never come anywhere close to what Gary Anderson makes if she remains in the same type of position as she's currently in. It's just the reality of her position. And if she really likes the position that she's in, that won't be a problem for her. But if she wants to make money that's closer to what Gary Anderson's making as the head football coach, well, she might want to find a new way of marketing her skills.
Right. So let's talk about this for a second here, because these are the top 10 coaches in salary. And we all know that Nick Saban's at the top with 7.08 or 0.87 million. And then Harbaugh's after that, just under him at 7 million, like Harbaugh or Saban makes about $70,000 more. Urban Meyers, Bob Stoops, Jimbo Fisher, Charlie Strong, which is interesting. We'll get to that in a minute. Kevin Sumlin, which is also interesting. We'll get to that. James Franklin, Les Miles, and Hugh Freeze. Those are the top 10. So I think it's interesting the names that are in the top 10, and especially guys like Charlie Strong and Kevin Sumlin, and specifically focusing on Strong because, I mean, he hasn't really done anything yet, and he's pulling in $5.1 million a year. And his max bonus is looks like $1 million. So what do you think about guys like Strong making that kind of money?
The skill set that you bring into a job helps to dictate the type of salary that you get, but the geographic market that you're in has an influence on that as well. And being in the state of Texas and being the head football coach for the flagship institution like Charlie Strong is, and then with Kevin Sumlin, being at Texas A&M, still in that same geographic marketplace, those salaries for each of those coaches make sense to me, even for Charlie Strong, given the growing pains that his team is having right now.
Do you think it's interesting that a guy like Art Briles makes more than Frank Beamer? Like significantly more?
Yeah, I think it does surprise me to some extent. I mean, Beamer's been at Virginia Tech forever, and he's had his fair share of success there. But then Briles, I think everybody knows he came up through the high school ranks in Texas, and he had a lot of success at the University of Houston. He may have really laid the groundwork for what's gone on there. Then he heads to Baylor, and I think for when Baylor hired him, they were trying to be a larger player in the Big 12, and they were having to go up against Texas. So what Baylor decided to pay Briles, they had to overpay to really get the guy that they thought was the person to turn it around. And in retrospect, it seems like money very well spent. I mean, I would compare it to the Kansas City Royals a few years ago, and going after Gil Mesh as a free agent pitcher, and I think he got something like $55 million and just completely overpaid. But my argument was, well, it's Kansas City, and this was before they were anywhere close to sniffing the playoffs. It's Kansas City, so if you want to get even a middle-of-the-road free agent, they were going to have to overspend by quite a bit. And I think the same mindset holds true with Baylor, except the dividends that Briles has paid there, at least on the field, have just been remarkable.
What do you think Brian Kelly's salary is? I don't have it. It's not on the chart, right? Because it's not public. Notre Dame doesn't publish it. But what would you guess his salary is?
I'd probably guess maybe 3.5 to low 4s.
You think he's worth it?
Yeah, I think he's worth it. He got that team to a national championship game a few years ago. To me, it doesn't matter if they won or lost that game. He got Notre Dame back to that kind of national stage, a place that they had not been in a really long time before he got there. And it's Notre Dame. So, I mean, they can't they can't be Notre Dame. They can't wear that title and, pay their coach, $2.5 million like Wisconsin's paying Gary Anderson, because I don't think any top tier coach is going to sign on at Notre Dame simply for the prestige while only making like $2 million.
So we had this conversation earlier in our super private Slack group or whatever about Brian Kelly and obviously Randy Edsall and all the coaches that might be on the hot seat. And, obviously we talk about Butch Jones every day and Charlie Strong, and that name kind of comes up. A guy like Brian Kelly who makes in $4 million or whatever number you said there. Do you think that if any of these other jobs open up, Tennessee, Texas, anything else? I mean, I guess I don't know what a step up from Notre Dame would be or a lateral move. Do you think that that's a place where he could go, or do you think that he is comfortable in his skin at Notre Dame and there's little to no pressure on him at this point right now?
I think there's little to no pressure on him at this point right now. If whatever the usual amount of pressure is at Notre Dame, I think it's just fine, and it's not at a level that's blown out of proportion. I don't see where he would go in the college ranks after Notre Dame that would not at least be a perceived step down. Because he could go to, let's say, for argument's sake, he could go to Tennessee, but now he's having. Right, it is a step down. Yes. Yeah. But he could go to a Tennessee or heck, he could go to Alabama if Nick Saban, out of the blue decided that he would take $10 million from Texas. He could go to Alabama, but it's still not the same as being at Notre Dame. Because I know a lot of people, myself included, have talked about, should Notre Dame just join a conference? Should they stay independent? Well, I think he's got it made at Notre Dame as an independent versus even coaching at an Alabama that's playing in a conference. Because really, at Notre Dame as an independent, they're only competing against themselves for legitimacy week in and week out.
Right. I agree with you. Obviously, 100%. I think that there's very few places he could go after you leave Notre Dame. And I think that's the same for Nick Saban after he leaves Alabama, and to whatever extent you want to say how good of a coach he is or how much success he has, the same thing applies to whoever's coaching Texas. So I think in that realm, you can say Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas, and USC are kind of like the top tier. And then you can kind of put Michigan up there because they're Michigan and all this stuff that goes with that. But I think everything else is kind of a step backwards for those guys.
Yeah, I think that's hard to disagree with.
What is going on with Butch Jones?
Well, I mean, based on the press conference that occurred this afternoon, I think from their athletic director, there's absolutely no factual basis to the suggestion that he got physical with a player. Now, I don't know exactly how in-depth of an investigation occurred that led the athletic director to consider all of this completely off base, but he made the statement on the record today, and for Tennessee's sake and for the AD's sake, I hope this doesn't come back to bite him in the butt.
Well, I mean, we always say it's not the crime, it's the cover-up, right? I mean,
yep.
Look at Nixon and you look at Urban Meyer, and obviously they're two totally different things. Or I'm sorry, not Urban Meyer, Jim Tressel.
Yes.
I apologize. And the crimes may not have been that bad, or I guess whatever side you're on with Nixon, whatever, Democrat, Republican, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't born, so I don't really care. But it isn't what they did. It's what they did after, instead of just manning up, and then just taking whatever punishment lightly. And, we always talk about Ohio State in the instant case here with Jim Tressel. And, obviously he, lied to your own compliance people. Like, I don't know why you would do that, but he did. And a lot of people say he did it because he was trying to protect his players, which, I mean, I don't really know if that worked out for anybody in the end. So, yeah, I mean, for Butch Jones, I sincerely hope that it is 100% false, because I think if there's even a little bit of a hint of truth to this, it blows up in everybody's face. His face, Dave Hart, who's the AD there, And then the president, I don't know what that guy's name, Cheeks or whoever that guy is who's the president.
Yeah, I don't recall the president's name, but this has the potential. I'm not saying that it will turn out like this, but this has the potential to be sort of like Tim Beckman at Illinois, where there were these rumors about what was going on in his practices and how he was treating players and how his assistants were treating players, and then players started to speak up from where was he at before Illinois? Was he at Toledo?
Yeah, it was either at Toledo or Ohio State. I can't remember where he came from.
So it was where he was a head coach. So I think he was at Toledo.
Oh, Toledo, yeah.
And a player or two, popped, started to kind of come out of the woodwork there, saying, "Hey, this went on, with me at Toledo also." And as we saw this morning, a former Cincinnati player tried to do the same thing. So I think there's enough smoke there that it's worth a legitimate investigation before anybody has a definitive on the record comment about it.
Yeah, you and I had this conversation earlier in the Slack channel, and then I don't know, 5 minutes after you said those words, like there needs to be a definitive explanation, I saw that tweet where the president or the AD or whoever came out and said that this didn't happen and we did our due diligence. And it's one of those things like, did they forget? Did they ignore what happened in Illinois? Like, you can't just go on the record and say this didn't happen and we're confident in this, and then no one's actually looked into it.
Right, because they basically did their due diligence in a matter of a handful of days.
Yeah, that seems very odd to me. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, who? I mean, right? We'll never know, I guess, at this point. Who's making the accusations anyway?
Well, I think it's a current offensive lineman for him, whose last name is Crowder. A couple of days ago, somebody asked his dad about it, and the dad wouldn't confirm it or deny it. And I suppose if you're the family, maybe you just don't want any part of it, so you offer that uncommittal answer. But then, the Cincinnati player pops up today, and you have to think that on the record statement from Hart in support of Butch Jones, you had to think that he was planning to do that, as the Cincinnati player was speaking up, even though it was unbeknownst to Hart at the time. So the whole thing it doesn't look good. Even if there's absolutely nothing to it, it doesn't look good. And I think the athletic department at Tennessee jumped the gun a little bit in rushing to defense of their coach.
All right, I have 4 questions for you. These are random. Actually, they're not so random, but they're kind of random. Who's the best team in college football?
That's really difficult. I'm going to give a politician-like answer. I think there's so much parity going on right now, and I think we've talked about this the past week or so. It seems like every Saturday's a new season. I don't know what to expect. I don't know how these guys go to Las Vegas and make bets this year, because it's just a complete crapshoot this year. But based on what I've seen, I think TCU can make a strong claim to it. As much as it pains me to admit this, because I have been known to be lukewarm on them. Baylor looks really good. I mean, I think they have some issues, and I think they're a bit predictable on offense, but they've been so consistent this year. I mean, if they're Baylor, because of the rate that they score, they're going to give up some points of their own. But, darn, they have just been consistent. And if you look at some of their box scores lately, they're not just a pass-happy offense. All of a sudden, there's some real balance between the run game and the pass game. So I'm inclined to go with a Big 12 team, either TCU or Baylor.
So I would say, based on what we've seen, I have to agree with you. The problem for me is that the Big 12 is terrible.
Yes, yeah, that's the same problem that
right.
that I have with it. And I wonder what happens when let's play hypothetical. What happens in, say, the first round of the college football playoff when Baylor goes up against, let's say, Alabama, and they get hit in the nose by that by that defensive front. We kind of saw that last year when Baylor took on Michigan State in the Alamo Bowl, I think it was. It didn't turn out really well for Baylor, and Mark D'Antonio found a way of slowing that Art Briles offense down. But a lot can happen between now and the college football playoff. It's shaping up to be a jumbled mess.
So I think that, and obviously I have no idea what's going to happen between now and December 15th or whenever that last game is or whatever. And I might have said this to you before. I mean, I don't think either TCU or Baylor gets in this year. I think it's right. It's October 8th or whatever day it is. And if I had to pick 4 teams right now, Ohio State, Alabama, Utah, Clemson, I just can't put TCU or Baylor in because they haven't played anybody.
Well, I'm close to where you're at. I mean, Utah, right
Utah,
now.
to me, for the record, Utah I think is the best team in the country. They'll play Cal this week, who I think is very good. And the on balance, right? I would say this on balance. I think right now the Pac-12 is the best conference in the country, right?
Yeah.
We could talk about the SEC, but as a conference, 2 divisions of 30 teams, I don't know how many teams are out there conference. There's got to be 4 or 5 ranked teams in both divisions.
But yeah, I agree with you on the Pac-12, and I think part of I was saying that before the year even started, that the Pac-12 was going to be the best conference in the country, even over the SEC. And some of the teams have taken their lumps a little bit, but then when you see a team like Cal, who I don't think anybody expected them to be this good, this early in the season, except maybe Mike Wilson.
David Poole, probably.
Yeah. But when you see a team like Cal seemingly come out of nowhere, that just solidifies the strength up and down that conference. Now, this Saturday, they have a real opportunity to prove themselves, because I still don't really think they've played anybody up until this point. But they go to Utah, and I think I said this in my college quickie last week, that if they beat Utah, they obviously just proved everything to everyone. But I think they can still prove their worth even if they lose a close one.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm very interested in that game. I'm trying to see what time that game is. 10 o'clock Eastern, so 9 o'clock, for you. I'll never see it because I'll be in bed because I have 50 basketball games on Sunday. But I don't really know what else is on the slate this week. But to me, and just looking at this, Northwestern and Michigan looks really good this week. That's it.
Well, what'll be an entertaining game? Oklahoma State, West Virginia.
Oh, is that this weekend? Okay.
Yeah. There could be a ton of points put on the board in that thing.
At West Virginia, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be good.
And protect your couches.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially down there. And I'm interested to see, and this is, out of the 4 questions or whatever, but I'm interested to see how South Carolina handles traveling to LSU when they're supposed to be at home. We both agree that game's not going to be close, but I think having a home game in a stadium that's not yours, and the other team's marching band is playing your fight song, that's all weird to me. And I can't believe LSU's actually doing this, and I'm kind of surprised that South Carolina's not taking their band with them.
But the first thing I'll say, it's all a little condescending, I think. We all know that's a home game for LSU.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I don't care who gets the proceeds from the ticket sales. I don't care, what songs the band is playing. That is a home game for LSU. As far as, South Carolina's band not being there, if that wasn't in the original budget, they can't just throw that together unless someone was going to step forward and just give them a gift of money to get them out there. Based on South Carolina's game last weekend against Missouri, that was the first game all year that Missouri has shown any semblance of a running game. They had their backup running back rush for close to 100 yards, I believe. Maybe part of that is the offensive line for Missouri finally figuring things out. But if I'm South Carolina, and I gave up those kind of yards to Missouri's backup running back. What's Leonard Fournette going to do to that defense?
Yeah. Now, okay. Now, speaking of Missouri, we'll never see Matty Mock again, right?
I don't think we will. I have no idea why he was suspended. None of us outside of the program do. There's a pretty wild accusation, rumor as to why he was suspended. Until I see something concrete, I'm not going to publicly say, the reason for that. But if all of this is true, the way that I see this playing out for Matty Mock is this indefinite suspension that Gary Pinkel has around his neck. That is going to be for the remainder of the season. Drew Lock is the Missouri Tigers starting quarterback for the remainder of the season. And then I would be shocked if Matty Mock does not transfer and is basically we're basically given the excuse that he wants to be closer to his father, who has gone through cancer recovery. I think he's gone through chemo. So the kid's dealing with some stuff there. So I think that provides a very unfortunate but convenient way out for him.
Okay, so my next question, which Power 5 coach's seat is the hottest?
Minus Randy Edsall.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, here's the thing, like out of nowhere this morning.
Yeah.
It seemed like he was like fired and gone. And then like an hour later, like there were 50 articles about him being fired or going to be fired and how his seat's been warm all year. I didn't know his seat was warm. I didn't even know it was. Before this morning, I had no idea.
I didn't either. I didn't know that, the Maryland Terrapins playing in the Big Ten West, I didn't know they were underachieving compared to expectations for them this year. But no, they're in the East. I'm sorry. I had a directional mix up there. They are in the East with Michigan and Michigan State and Ohio State. And Penn State. So minus Randy Edsall in the fiasco that started up there this morning, I'm inclined to say I would make it a tie between Butch Jones and Al Golden at this point. And I don't know if either one of them being on the hot seat is entirely fair for different reasons.
So how is a guy like Gus Malzahn, how is he on the hot seat? Like, did I miss a national championship appearance or something? Like, did everybody else miss them appearing or winning an SEC title? Like, how are we here already?
That I think that's the craziest rumor we've had this week. He isn't going anywhere, and they're not running him out of town. I mean, that program is still, too close to the fumes of Gene Chizik, I think, for the luster to have worn off of Malzahn after a handful of games this season.
Charlie Strong safe?
Yeah, I think for the time being, I think his seat heats up quite a bit more if he goes out and that team lays another egg this weekend against Oklahoma. I mean, if they come out and they lose 55-7 again, or some kind of similar score, I think the burners get turned way up on him. But if he comes out, loses, but the team has a far more respectable showing than they did against TCU, I think he's just fine.
So I was trying to figure out when his contract was over. So he's getting $5 million a year, and Texas is paying $4.3 million to Louisville for his buyout.
Well, they can afford it there.
I mean, yeah, sure, but they're giving this guy like $50 million. I mean, in total compensation. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why they would agree to pay his buyout too. I guess that happens all the time, but my God, who has a buyout at $4 million?
Well, and that's another reason why that team is going to have to just have another monumental flop for his seat to really be considered warm, because like I said, it's Texas. They have a boatload of money, but still paying the buyout on his contract from Louisville, paying him $5 million to actually stand on the sideline at Texas. If they let him go and bring somebody else in, now they're paying 2 coaches the equivalent of 3 salaries.
Yeah, we talked about this the other day in our Slack group, and I can't see them letting him go. He has a 5-year contract, by the way, so 5 years from last year. So that puts him 5 plus 4 is 9, right? 2019. 5 plus 4 is still 9, isn't it?
Yep. It still is, even with Common Core.
Okay, thank you. Because Jesus Christ, Common Core, holy crap! Let's not get started on that road. So I mean, all right, it's 2015, right? And I guess maybe he doesn't last to 2019, but it would be very difficult for me as the president of the university, Fuentes, right? Isn't that the guy's name? Fenvez?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, yeah, whatever. Or the athletic director's name, who they don't have, which is interesting, right? Because they don't have an athletic director.
Right.
To say, all right, thanks for stopping in for 2 or 3 years. See you later, bye. And then we're just going to eat however much this is, 4.4 million times 5 plus the buyout or whatever. I mean, that's $30 million.
Yeah, unless he really embarrasses himself against Oklahoma, I think they almost have to give him at least the bare minimum of 1 more year.
I mean, I guess if it were me, right? Because they're gonna hire an athletic director this year. You would hope. So at the very minimum, he's going to get 1 more year with the new athletic director. So that will give him 3 of his 5 years of his contract, and then they could buy out the last 2. I mean, I guess I could see that. Common sense says you give him 4 years and buy out the last year, and then you start over. But the question is who are you going to get?
Well, I mean, that's what I was thinking. If they can him at any point before the contract runs out, they better have just a real home run lined up that they know that they can reel in, because they thought they had Saban, on board. They weren't able to close that deal. How close they really were to getting him, none of us really know. But he was clearly their first choice. So if they let Strong go, they better be darn certain that they have their number 1 man lined up, locked up, the ink ready to go on that dotted line. And I don't know if I said this on Twitter today or if I just thought it in my mind. I think Charlie Strong's best friend this year is going to be Shaka Smart. If Shaka Smart gets that basketball team winning and truly competitive in the Big 12, well, that gives everybody in the state and around the country something positive to talk about with Texas athletics. And Charlie Strong can go into his office and get his business figured out with this team for next year.
And you know what? It's the same situation for Butch Jones or Rick Barnes.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's very similar. The situations are very similar. I mean, Dave Hart's been the athletic director at Tennessee for 4 or 5 years now, I think. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people didn't like Butch Jones when they hired him. And where did he come from? Like Division II?
He came from Cincinnati.
That's right. He came from Cincinnati. Yeah, you're right. He did. You're right. You were just talking about that with the player who said that. You're right. And then they bring in Rick Barnes from Texas, and it's the same thing. I mean, once basketball starts in Tennessee, see, the good thing about Tennessee is they have multiple sports that are good or decent or that people actually care about. In Texas, there's 2, really. I mean, you can throw baseball in there if you want to, but I mean, whatever. If Tennessee basketball is good, then people will kind of leave the football program alone. But
well, Jones better win more than 4 or 5 games, though, too, I think.
Yeah, I think that of all the people that we can talk about, I mean, right, obviously minus Randy Edsel, I would say that Jones's seat is the warmest, but it's still difficult for me to see them because of Lane Kiffin and Derek Dooley and Butch Jones. Like, you're going to get rid of another coach. Like, I just don't see it. And I think this goes back to something that you and I talked about the other day. That's the similarities between Texas and Tennessee, is that these coaches don't have the gravitas to basically tell everybody to shut the F up while I figure this out.
Yeah, exactly. And they either don't have the gravitas to do that, or they just don't have the personality to do that.
Right. And I think at a place like Tennessee and a place like Texas, I think those are the places where you need a guy like people we talked about earlier today.
Bo Pelini.
Nick Saban and Bo Pelini, and even a Brian Kelly or what's the guy's name? Pete Carroll. Those guys who will come in and say, I know what I'm doing. Just sit over there and watch the games and keep donating money and keep buying alcohol. I'll take care of this part. I don't need your help here.
Well, Pete Carroll, I think, is an interesting name. He's having success with the Seahawks in the NFL this time around in the NFL. But the Seahawks are starting to have some problems of their own on the field, and who knows? Maybe when a Charlie Strong is possibly released from his duties at Texas, maybe Texas thinks that they can get someone like Pete Carroll to come back to the college ranks.
I think that'd be a great hire.
Yeah, and I think there'd be some irony there, because wasn't the last championship game appearance for Texas and USC when USC and Pete Carroll played Texas? Is that the last time for both of them?
Yeah, the vacated championship, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that would be very interesting. All right, I have what do I have? 2 more questions here for you. I do. Oh, okay. So I guess we just talked about Texas or Tennessee. My next question was Texas or Tennessee, which orange team faces the longest road to return? But I think we just covered that in depth. So here's the next question. Notre Dame or USC, which team has the hardest path to the playoff with 1 loss?
With 1 loss, I'm going to sound a little hypocritical here, but I think Notre Dame does, because of not playing in a conference. And I think it's garbage reasoning, but I think that even if it's at a subconscious level, that will factor into the minds of many on the committee. Well, and if USC only has 1 loss and the Pac-12 is truly as strong at the end of the year as you and I think it is now, then I think it's tough to keep USC out of it.
Okay, so let's tease this out here. We'll say we'll throw Ohio State and Alabama in. Is that fair? Playoff?
Yeah. Well, let me back up a step.
Okay.
If this is also assuming that well, USC already lost a game, didn't they?
Yeah, that's what I said. Both teams have 1 loss.
Yeah.
And they play each other next week. So one of these teams will have 2 losses.
Yeah, I mean, that's like we say every time this year, well, at least for the past year, we're getting to the point where for these upper echelon teams, every week is a play-in game.
Right. Now, I still think this is I know people hate the BCS, but I think this still works in the favor of the team that loses the earliest, because people forget about that loss.
Oh yeah.
And if you continue to play better, right? And the obvious example is Ohio State. I mean, very few of us said that Ohio State would make the playoff. Like that week 2, everybody lost in the Big Ten, and everybody said that the Big Ten will never make the playoff. And then obviously Ohio State goes to the playoff and they win the championship. And I think the good thing for Notre Dame and USC is they got their loss out of the way, and they will play each other next week, which somebody will lose that game. But I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing because of the upper echelon thing, because if you tease that out and USC has 2 losses and 1 loss is to Notre Dame, and if Notre Dame goes on to win every game and USC goes on to win every game and win the Pac-12 championship, how are they not in the playoff? Just because they have 2 losses? That shouldn't eliminate you.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, if Notre Dame's 1 loss is to Clemson on the road
in a monsoon,
in a monsoon, and they fought their butts back to even get in the position of going for that 2-point conversion. That game I thought was going to get out of hand on them. And I'll be honest with you, we were talking about the pressure that Brian Kelly does or doesn't feel at Notre Dame. I was watching that pregame routine that Clemson puts on, from the confines of my couch. It was nice and dry. And I, as just a complete innocent bystander in the whole thing, not really rooting for either team, but what they do was giving me goosebumps sitting on the couch. That whole way that they come in and the rock and parading into the stadium, and then they show Notre Dame coming in, and the look on Brian Kelly's face. I remember saying out loud, even though I was the only one in the room, "Wow, he looks nervous."
Yeah. You could argue that that's. I mean, obviously they played a national championship, but you could argue that that Clemson game was the biggest game of his career.
Yeah. I think you can make a case for that.
I think things are different now, and we talk about this. Every game is the biggest game of everyone's career and all this other stuff. But if you look at Notre Dame's schedule this year, 2015, they play the ACC teams, right? And Georgia Tech was no joke for them, and Virginia turned out to be no joke for them either. But on paper, I think the games that people look forward to, one was Clemson, one is USC, and I think that everything else kind of slots in under that. And we talked about the pressure for Brian Kelly earlier, but if he wins that game and they're 4-0 or 5-0 or whatever they would be if they had won, and then they go and run the table, they're in the playoff without a doubt. I mean, conference championship or not, and now they lose that game, and they've got to win every game and hope they get help from Clemson.
Yeah, and I mean, early in the season, I had USC pegged as a playoff team this year, but after watching how Notre Dame fought back against Clemson, I think Notre Dame has a much better chance of beating USC next week than I had given them credit for, because that style of offense that Clemson plays is they're tough to defend. I mean, they have all that speed and they just completely spread you out. But USC, while they're fast all over the field, they don't really spread you out the same way that Clemson does. It's a little bit more, I know it's used to death, but the USC offense is a little bit more pro style. And I think that kind of offensive set is easier for Notre Dame to defend. It's easier for a lot of teams to defend. So,
well, yeah, it's a single option. It's a single option offense. I mean, you have reads downfield. Look at me talking X's and O's like I know what the hell I'm talking about here. I mean, you have reads downfield, but I mean, your quarterback's not going to run.
Yeah, and
he's not an option.
With Cody Kessler just dropping back in the pocket like that, that's going to be an interesting matchup between him and Sheldon Day. Is I think the world of Sheldon Day as a defensive lineman, and I think he is going to be an exceptional pro. And I think he's my favorite player to watch on that entire Notre Dame team, and that's going to be a fun matchup to watch next week.
Super early, but now that we're talking about the Pac-12, I mean, the game that I'm looking forward to, November 21st, UCLA and Utah.
Yeah.
I mean, assuming everybody plays, wins out and both teams are still ranked, I think that's a great game. I mean, obviously UCLA, lost to Arizona State last week, but it's a Pac-12. I mean, it's a dog-eat-dog world. It's the same thing we say about the SEC West. I mean, we were ready to bury Alabama. The dynasty's over, blah, 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 blah. And then they come back and they, blow the doors off of Georgia. So I think the same thing about UCLA. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they have the Stanford this week.
Well,
at Stanford and then Cal.
Well, it's next week. Next week is a huge weekend for the Pac-12 because you have USC and Notre Dame, you have UCLA and Stanford, and you have Arizona State, who I know they're not ranked right now, but still you have Arizona State and Utah. You have three just really marketable games, I think, that will have a big impact on both the conference and the national scene.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the conference would love for USC to win. I think a lot of America would like USC to win because everybody hates Notre Dame. And UCLA and Stanford, right? I mean, that could be interesting. I don't have a whole lot of faith in Stanford. I know they're number 16. We talked about this earlier this year. I still think UCLA is a team to beat in that conference. Obviously, Cal and Utah was not on anyone's radar this year. I don't care what anybody says. And what was the other game? Arizona State and
Utah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that game, yeah. And let me see where that game is because I have the schedule right.
I think it's at Utah.
You are right. It is at Utah. So, another 10 o'clock game, of course, because they can't play during the day so the rest of us can see it. Yeah, I mean, you're right. That's a great weekend for the Pac-12. I mean, they should, hopefully, like I said, I mean, for their sake, they need USC, and really, they need Utah, and they need Stanford to make statements so that people remember them on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, look at what USC has to face. I mean, after they finish this game with Washington, that they're up 3-0 in the second quarter right now. Once this game finishes up, they play Notre Dame, then they play Utah, then they play a Cal team that is better than any of us expected, and then they get a little downtime and get a little rest and have to play Arizona.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, I think that's the type of schedule, especially with that non-con game with Notre Dame thrown in there. That's the type of run that people typically attribute to an SEC team in conference.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Arizona isn't ranked, but I mean, Notre Dame, Utah, Cal, right? All top 25. Arizona, and then Colorado, whatever they are, and then Oregon and Utah, or Oregon and UCLA. Like, that's tough for Southern Cal. The other thing that we want to talk about, and actually USC is part of this conversation, and we'll get into some of the other teams here. Your article about teams that are superpowers.
Yes.
About Miami, because there are people in this world that believe that Miami football is or once was a superpower. And you noted the period of success for them. What was it, 79 to 2003? Is that what it was?
Yeah, roughly. I mean, I'd say they were really dominant maybe starting in the mid-'80s on. I think because Howard Schnellenberger got there in the late 70s, and he really laid the groundwork for what guys like Jimmy Johnson and Dennis Erickson really pushed through with.
So tell me, okay, so back in my More Than a Fan days, before Campus Pressbox even existed, and when like I said, I was still at More Than a Fan, my actually very first college football article was about the kings of NCAA football. So Miami's in there, but I'll just give you the teams in here, and you can at the end or as I go or whatever, you can tell me if I'm good or if I'm high or whatever. Alabama.
Well, hold on a minute.
Yes.
So roughly, what year was this written? Was this 2012?
2012.
Okay.
But this is like evergreen content, right? I call it. So like these teams should always be really good. You know what I mean? Like they should be in the upper echelon. And obviously, we're going to get to a few that are not. But I think we would agree that Michigan is still, Alabama is still a superpower. Would you call Alabama a superpower?
Yes, absolutely. I would call Alabama a superpower.
Okay. And I guess what I should have asked you is what your criteria is, because when I read the draft of your column, we got into a little bit about the national championships thing, and I don't know if that's the best barometer of what a superpower is, but why don't you give me what your criteria is?
I mean, for me, a superpower, is that handful of teams that have double-digit national championships, and there are a few of those teams that they have national championships within multiple models of getting the championship. There's the college football playoff, or the BCS, or the old way of basically being voted in. So essentially based on the proverbial eye test. But for me, a superpower are those teams that have the double-digit national championships. So we're talking about, I think, like USC's, the Michigans, the Notre Dames. I think there were a couple of others in there that I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head right now.
Alabama, Oklahoma.
Yeah, Alabama, Oklahoma. And then you have some other teams that they're close to that double-digit national championship mark. Let's say like Ohio State, Texas, Nebraska. That while they're not superpowers, I think that as a program, they're all just really dominant teams. And there is a degree of splitting hairs between what's a dominant team historically and what is an historical superpower. But that's kind of what I'm looking at. I mean, those dominant teams, I think they could get to the point where they're considered superpowers, and some of them are probably close. But I think that superpower moniker is just a really elite, small group of teams that not just anybody can be in that club. And if you're on the outside looking in, there's absolutely no shame whatsoever in that, because those teams that I would consider to be dominant could still just kick everybody else's butt on any given Saturday.
Okay, so Ohio State has, and I would get more garbage than usual if I didn't at least bring up Ohio State here. Ohio State has 8 national championships, mythical or undisputed or whatever, whatever. Superpower or no?
I don't think they are. I think they're one of those teams that I would consider to be a really dominant team. They have the 8 championships, and they have, I think, as you noted in your More Than a Fan article, someone like Archie Griffin who won multiple Heismans. I mean, they certainly have an incredibly rich history within college football, and I'm not trying to take anything at all away from an Ohio State by not calling them a superpower. But I think I would still classify them as a dominant team. But, Urban Meyer is perfectly capable of notching a couple of more national championships under that program's belt. So, maybe within my criteria, they get themselves to that superpower level.
And so obviously if Ohio State's not, then you would also consider Tennessee not a superpower either. And right now we would agree that they're not even a dominant team.
No, I mean, right now Tennessee's not a dominant team, but historically as an overall program, yeah, I'd put them in that dominant level.
And it's interesting. Texas has 9 national championships.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you one of them.
Yeah. I'm the same way. Well, because that last one that they won, wasn't that the first one since maybe the 70s?
Yeah, hang on, I'm looking it up right now. It's so weird how Texas Longhorn football. Okay, so all right. So I don't know what I used to determine what national championships there were, because this article that I wrote actually says Ohio State has 14.
I noticed that.
Yeah, so I don't know, and that was 2012, and I mean, many would say I still don't know what I'm doing, but I definitely didn't know what I was doing when I wrote that. So that said, Texas has 4 national championships on their Wikipedia page, which is what I should have done in 2012 instead of doing.
That's what I used as well.
Yeah,
the Wikipedia page.
The warehouse. Yeah, I probably use Data Warehouse, college football warehouse, but 63, 69, 70, and then 2005 for Texas national championships.
And I think that should say a lot to all of the teams in college football. The first thing I think it should say to them is, if Texas can go through a drought like that, it shouldn't be considered easy for any program, regardless of what conference they're in, or in Notre Dame's case, being an independent. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to win a national championship when a team like Texas has that kind of drought. I think the other thing that says is, if Texas can have some really lean years in there, like they did with John Malkovich, and if Alabama can have some really lean years in there, basically between Bear Bryant and Nick Saban, then, Tennessee and Nebraska and all of these other teams that are, in that top tier mix, their fans just need to settle down, because, it's not easy to win at the level that they expect. And I think those expectations are a bit misguided more often than not.
Notre Dame superpower?
Yeah.
11 national championships, right? I mean, that's it. And
they're Notre Dame.
And I think, right, and I was going to say, I think outside of that, I think the staying power is that they are, in 2015, the only, right, FBS Power 5 independent, right? Because I don't even think BYU is classified as a FBS team, right? Or a Power 5 team, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
They declared some of these teams Power 5 teams, and some of these other teams aren't. And I think that Notre Dame was the only independent that got classified as a Power 5. So like who else is in a conference? Like Army, maybe? One of these other teams that's not in a conference that is obviously FBS is not considered Power 5. But for whatever reason, Notre Dame is still considered Power 5. And obviously they have their own television network.
Well, here's what's really remarkable to me about Notre Dame, and I didn't think of this until just now, to be completely honest. They have the 11 national championships. They are who they are, and that's all with, basically Ohio State, Michigan State, all being right in their backyard, more or less, and they still have had this incredible amount of national success. And I would throw Michigan in there also. So you have this cluster of top tier teams that have all managed to be really good and oftentimes in the same year. And then you look at some of these other teams, like let's say Missouri, who's smack dab in the middle of Missouri, basically 2 hours from any kind of metropolitan area. They don't have any competition around them really, as far as another power 5 type of team. And they've had their years of just absolute miserable struggle. But then you see these guys like Notre Dame and Michigan. It doesn't matter that they're in each other's backyard. They still get it done.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's very interesting, and not that I want to have a Notre Dame show with you, but I think this is the part of the conversation where Big Ten people get really upset about Notre Dame not being in their conference or not willing to join their conference. And I think they're the leaders of the Notre Dame needs to join a conference, get all in on a conference thing. And the Notre Dame people would say, and you can throw me in that group if you want to, I don't care, would say, why would we join the Big Ten? Like, it doesn't make any sense for us to join a conference where we play half the teams already, and it recruiting wise, it makes no sense for us to recruit a part of the country where we already can recruit just because we're Notre Dame. Like, it makes a ton of sense for them to go south or west into a conference and just travel every week than it would be to play Ohio State, Michigan State, and Indiana and Purdue. Like, really? Like, you think that's a step up from the ACC? I don't see Indiana or Purdue. I guess maybe Indiana this year, but I don't see Purdue or I don't know, pick your other team that's not really good, Illinois, giving them the same type of contest that Georgia Tech or Virginia gave them this year.
No, not at all. And I want to back up a minute also,
sure,
because I know that I could take some flack for including Missouri in this conversation, but I don't think people are really old enough anymore, by and large, that to remember when Missouri was a real dominant program. And I'm talking about even before I was born. In the 60s, when Dan Devine was there, I want to say that Missouri program had either more just outright wins, the highest winning percentage for the decade of the 60s, than any other college program. So, I mean, they were going head-to-head with the Alabamas and Notre Dames and Ohio States of the world. And there were times that all those teams were on their non-conference schedule. Sometimes they were playing them, in back-to-back games in the same season. And they were still winning at an incredibly high level. And then the early 80s rolled around, and all of a sudden, for a myriad of reasons, they just fell off the face of the college football map.
What's your favorite bowl game?
Just because of what I remember watching growing up in middle school, I like the Fiesta Bowl, I like the Cotton Bowl, I like the Orange Bowl. Those are the games that I remember.
Okay, so Bert and I talked about this the other day in our podcast where we talked about the 5 places that he loves in the SEC and the 5 stadiums that I've never been to that I'd like to go to, and I said the Sugar Bowl. I think the Sugar Bowl's the best one. I know the Rose Bowl people will kick my butt, and the Big Ten people and the Pac-12 people will, evict me from college football. But I think the Sugar Bowl's the best bowl, and I don't disagree with you on any of those. But of the ones that you said, I think the Cotton Bowl's the best.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, my bias with that is those are the games that I remember watching. And growing up in Columbia, Missouri, I watched the Orange Bowl because the Big 8 had the tie-in there. The first game of the year for Missouri, after they score that first touchdown, as ridiculous as it was because of how bad they were, everybody threw oranges on the field, because of the Orange Bowl. And so, I mean, I remember Nebraska and Miami, and like the Fiesta Bowl. Who was it? That Shane Conlon Penn State team taking on Vinny Testaverde and the Miami Hurricanes, I think. I mean, I remember that almost like it was yesterday.
If you had to pick one college stadium that you've never been to, which one would it be, and why?
I would really like to go to LSU.
At night? Because I mean, during the day it's not pretty, but at night, I mean, it would be fun.
if I just went there just as an innocent bystander, not either not rooting for either team or just rooting for LSU out of my own safety.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing you can do. You would just fake your way for 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, when you see it on TV, it looks incredible. I went to LSU's campus. When was it? After my senior year of high school, maybe it's after my junior year of high school, kind of I don't know, early 90s, something like that. Now, I remember walking by the stadium and just looking up at this thing, and just in person, it was just this mountain of a structure that just absolutely incredible. And ever since, I was on that campus looking up at that stadium, that's always been a place that I've wanted to see a football game at.
So, and it's interesting you say that because today's the 27th anniversary of the earthquake game, which Bert and I talked about, Auburn and LSU. So that's actually a good pick.
Well, I mean, when I was at Mizzou and in the band, I went to all of the Big 8 stadiums with the exception of Oklahoma State, which I probably wasn't really missing much by.
Yeah, then you weren't.
Yeah, by missing that, and I mean, I remember going to Oklahoma, and that just had this real nostalgic feel to it. I mean, the grass was just impeccably green, and it just the building structure and the brick and the coloration of it. It just had this really nostalgic feel that really came through in it. So I think of the stadiums that I've been to, Norman is probably my favorite. My least favorite, just to balance it out, was before the Big 12 was formed. Missouri had a little non-conference series with Baylor, and that place was just a dump. It was just a bowl, and it was just a dump.
And I hear the new place is a palace.
Yeah, and I think anything in comparison to the old place would be a palace. But yeah, the pictures I've seen of the new place is just really immaculate. And then I think the funniest place I ever saw a game at was when Missouri played Houston in the old Astrodome.
Oh yeah, okay.
Well, neither one of those teams were any good at all, so there was basically nobody there for that game. But what got me laughing, what got a chuckle out of me, when they would do the national anthem in the dome, when they sang the Rockets' Red Glare, they'd shoot this firework off to stream across the inside of the dome.
Really?
Yeah. So there's the funniest stadium I've been to, my favorite stadium, and my least favorite.
So the one place in the Big 12 that I'm surprised about that is bad or looks terrible on TV, and I kind of feel like maybe it's bad and there's no like ambiance, I guess, or whatever, is Texas.
I've been there also, and you're right. There's no ambiance. It just a generic feel. I think part of that was because it was Texas against Missouri. Missouri was not very good at the time, and it wasn't a good game. So, the fans didn't have a real reason to get all riled up and to get loud because the outcome was really predetermined. I mean, if you're talking Big 12 stadiums just solely, my least two favorite that have absolutely no atmosphere at all were Ames, Iowa, and Manhattan, Kansas. Now, I haven't been to Manhattan since they did their renovation, but Ames, Iowa is just a glorified high school stadium.
Rivalry game that you've never been to that you want to go to?
Maybe it's because it's what's going to be played this weekend, but, Texas OU, when both teams are really good, I think would be a good one to go to. And I'm going to name a second one that I believe in the next couple of years they're going to start playing again, and that's Oklahoma, Nebraska.
I have to tell you something. I don't even remember those two teams playing. Like, I mean, I remember them playing, but that doesn't even feel like it was a rivalry game for me.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a geographic thing, and, I'm basically an old Big 8 guy, but, I mean, man, though, when those two teams met, it was always for the Big 8 crown, it seemed like. And I mean, the players and the Heisman trophies that went through there, just unbelievable. When he had Barry Switzer and Tom Osborne on either sideline, just that game for the Big Eight was probably every bit as big as like Michigan, Ohio State.
How long do you think Stoops lasts at Oklahoma?
Well, I mean, he hasn't playing really well again. Maybe part of that is just the overall quality of the Big 12 that you kind of alluded to earlier in the conversation. But this year could kind of light a spark under him. I thought after last year maybe he could be swayed away, but he's winning again, and he's in a conference that he should be able to win. And so I mean I could see the very realistic possibility of him retiring there.
All right, Seth, tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me on the Campus Pressbox. Everything that I write can be found there. Like I always say at the end of the SEC 411 podcast with Bird, I don't have a fancy personal website like Bird does. So you can find my writing on campuspressbox.com. You can also hear me co-host with Bird LaCroix the SEC 411.
Okay, I'm Damien Bowman, DAMIENBOWMAN at Twitter, and then Damien.Bowman at campuspressbox.com if you want to email me. My co-host, Mike Wilson, who is coaching football right now, is at Pigskin Opinion. Every time I try and spell it, I mess it up, so good luck with that on your own. I don't know, we publish once or twice a week, I guess, at this point, so I don't know, just subscribe, and campuspressbox.com/subscribe for this podcast, and the SEC 411, where Seth and Bird have real guests on. It's not just me. It's people who actually people want to listen to. So, Seth, thank you very much for stopping by on a Thursday night.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, everybody, thanks, and have a great night.